Welcome to the Littoral Zone podcast. I'm your host, Phil Rowley. The Littoral Zone, or shoal area of the lake, is a place where the majority of the action takes place. My podcast is intended to do the same, put you where the action is to help you improve your stillwater fly fishing. On each broadcast, I, along with guests from all over the world, will be providing you with information, tips and tricks, flies, presentation techniques, along with different lakes or regions to explore. I hope you enjoy today's podcast. Please feel free to email me with your Stillwater-related fly fishing questions and comments. I do my best to answer as many as we can prior to each episode, just before the main content. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's show.
This is Dave, your Wet Fly Swing podcast host, Phil Roy, back for another huge episode of the Littoral Zone today. This is our chance to break down stillwater fishing from one of the best, so you have the tools you need for success this season.
Compared to moving waters, stillwater fly fishers tend to spend most of our effort using a variety of subsurface presentations. We just don't seem to have, or perhaps it might be better to say, take advantage of catching stillwater trout on the surface using either dry or emerger patterns. The visual take to a fly on the surface is perhaps one of the best experiences fly fishing has to offer. Joining me today is Jeff Perin, owner of the Fly Fisher's Place Fly Shop located in Sisters, Oregon. He is also a stillwater addict. Within a short drive of his shop, Jeff has several quality trout lakes to choose from. One of Jeff's favorite stillwater presentation methods involves using dry and emerger patterns to catch trout on his local lakes, especially terrestrials. Jeff has applied the tricks and techniques he has learned on both his home waters and other lakes around the world, including Australia, to be consistently successful using surface flies. I'm really looking forward to talking with Jeff about his stillwater experiences and especially his approach to fishing dry flies on lakes.
Okay, let's jump into this one and let Phil do his best mic drop as we head out onto the water. If you have questions anytime, you can reach out to Phil or me. You can head over to wetflyswing.com or check in with Phil.
All right, so joining us today is Jeff Perin, owner-operator, I don't know if that's the right term, Jeff, operator of the Fly Fisher's Place in Sisters, Oregon. So welcome to my podcast, Jeff. It's great to have you on. I've been an admirer of yours for a while now, especially those waters you get the pleasure of fishing down there. So why don't we tell my listeners who you are and how you got into fly fishing, how long, all that good stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've been an admirer of yours, obviously, too, Phil, you and Brian. I've taught, me and all of us down here in Oregon so much. So it's been great to read your books and watch your videos and subscribe to your what do you call that?
The app?
What do you call that? The app. Yes. The old app.
Yeah, which unfortunately isn't running anymore. Long story short, the app developer unfortunately decided it to shut down. Brian and I weren't aware that was going to happen, but we've still got all the content, most of the video content. So we're just trying to work out a way to repurpose that. So we really enjoyed doing that and hope to sort of resurrect it in some form in the near future. So, but you've had the good fortune to travel all over the world because out of your fly shop in Oregon, obviously you've got trips that you do to your local lakes and guide there, but you also do hosted trips and get around a little bit, both with your customers and a little bit for yourself and some of the competition environments too, correct?
Yeah. I've been lucky enough to travel to a lot of places. We're actually heading with a group to Belize the day after the American Thanksgiving. I know you guys just had your Canadian Thanksgiving here recently, but ours is coming up in about 2 weeks. And the day after, we're taking a group of 9 down to Belize, and then we go back again in the springtime. And in between there, I'll go with a group to Argentina. And we've actually got about 20 people going to Argentina over the winter, 8 of which will be going with me in February. So that's a nice little bit of business. It'll be my 22nd trip down to Patagonia when I go this time. And, like you, I know you spent some time at Jurassic Lake. Yeah. I've not been to Jurassic Lake, but I've been to lots of other places around in Chilean and Argentine Patagonia. And boy, I sure do love it. And the lake fishing there is much different than the lake fishing I do here in Central Oregon. But I always try to get the guides to take me an extra day on some of those lakes down there, because fishing big fat Alberts and chubby Chernobyls around the bank lines or dragonflies or something when the time is right is pretty darn exciting fishing. And yeah, years ago, not too many years ago, in 2018, we traveled down to Tasmania. And I'll kind of tell you how that started, actually. Yeah. The Fly Fishing International, formerly Federation of Fly Fishers, was holding their 50th anniversary conclave. The very first conclave was on the Mackenzie River, not too far from my fly shop in Sisters, Oregon. And they decided to bring back the 50th anniversary back to Oregon, because most of those conclaves had been held in West Yellowstone or Idaho Falls or, out someplace in the Rockies. And they decided for the 50th, they'd come back to Oregon, where it all started. So we welcome that. And I had the opportunity to actually teach some classes during the conclave here when it returned to Bend. I was teaching some urine in classes on the North Santiam River and also the Crooked River. And these great people named Peter and Karen Brooks took my class, and they were the lodge owners in Tasmania. And after the class, they said, Jeff, you've just got to come down and join us in Tasmania. So to make a long story short, we put together a little group of friends and travelers that we like to go with, and off we went. And I honestly, Phil, it was kind of one of those, at least for fishing life, that was a fishing life-changing event, because we got to fish with some pretty interesting folks down there. Peter and Karen, notwithstanding, are wonderful, wonderful hosts, and honestly, she's one heck of a fisherman. She's a comp angler herself. They had a guide named Tom Jarman, who was ended up being our Tina and I's guide for several days. And I remember being out on the lake the first day. We were with his coach. I'm trying to remember his name right now. Older fella, very good guide. And my friends Ron and Daryl were with Tom, and the other two couples were with two of the other guides, Peter and Karen. And we that very first time out there, we were lock style fishing. I'd never seen lock style fishing. Here in Oregon, we use a drogue or a sea anchor, and kind of troll with it. But it never occurred to me to turn around the other direction and cast downwind and do all those different presentations and methods, lock style, including a lot of dry fly fishing. So, about 3 days into the trip, I think the group were sitting at the dinner table, and we all were discussing our guides, and, Karen and Peter were there, and they were the hosts. They did everything. They made coffee and served breakfast, guided all day, served dinner, and cleaned up. It was really incredible. But we're sitting at the dinner table, and nobody was in disagreement that Tom Jarman was probably an absolute fishing savant, plus just a very pleasant fella. So we decided to invite him to Oregon. Tina and I went out and talked to him. He was working on his boat out in the driveway of the lodge, and we said, hey, if we bought you a plane ticket, would you come to Oregon and teach some classes, stay with us and fish with us? And he just lit up, he's, my God, mates, that would be so great. So sure enough, mid-June, we picked him up at the airport and ended up extending his stay, and we had him teach some clinics for us, lots and lots of clinics on Euro style techniques on the rivers, but we also did some clinics on the lakes, and just continued our own education, but really allowed our customer base to learn so much more than we ever knew. And it just brought, I think the more you know, the better it gets.
Yeah, 100%. That's my motto. You never stop learning, because probably when you pass on into the next life, that's when you learn something new. But as far as fishing goes, every day out on the water, every chance you get, you learn something new. And to learn how people do things in other parts of the world, that's so applicable here, because you're right, we do get pigeonholed. Our culture is, we do a lot of anchored fishing. Lock style fishing is only starting to sort of, people are experimenting with it and finding out it's a very enjoyable way of fishing. Of course, as you and I both know, it's the way they competition fish, because it keeps the playing field level. Nobody's, sort of lock themselves into one spot of the lake and has that, run of that prime structure or where the fish are, everybody gets a fair chance. So it's definitely a neat way to fish, and I really enjoy it. So, and I guess part of that is where we're going today is the techniques, tactics you learned from Tom and others and yourself, and you've applied for fishing dry flies.
Yeah.
Surface patterns on lakes, because I know from my development that was something you didn't do very often. We fished a lot of subsurface stuff, fishing chironomid, pupa, and larvae, and leeches and damsels, and all the other major food groups. But I think we both agree that when you get the opportunity to fish a dry fly in any situation, moving water, on the ocean with a gurgler or something, or lakes, you want to be prepared for it so you can take advantage of it, because there's nothing better, I think, than watching a nose poke out and you get instant feedback on your pattern, your presentation right then and there, because the fish took it. Whereas fishing subsurface, you could be, a lot of it's a mystery until something locks up and you catch something. So I'm looking forward to talking with you about that today. So, but let's just go back. You live in Sisters, Oregon, so that's where the Fly Fishers Place is.
Yep.
You are the longest running, or I think you said tenured fly shop in both Oregon and Washington, correct?
Not tenured fly shop, but fly shop owner in Oregon and Washington.
Right.
So yeah, I'm just started my 34th year of owning the Fly Fishers Place, and so no plans to retire quite yet.
Well, if you're in a fly shop, you probably can't, right?
Yeah. Well, hopefully someday, Phil.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to be 55 here on my next birthday, and figure I still got another good 10 years in me on that. At some point I would certainly like to kind of step back from the fly shop, I've been writing preseason orders for the last month since the guide season kind of started to slow down, just counting flies and, seeing what we bought last year and projecting what we're going to need next year. It's tedious. It's a lot of work. And, I'd rather be fishing right now.
Daniel from Northern Rockies Adventures will be joining me on the podcast this year. Check it out, episode 540, where we're going to talk about what it was like growing up in the Northern Rockies and around float planes, and what it was like becoming a float plane captain. And we also find out about the family premium BC fly fishing business. Stay tuned and be sure to check out nradventures.com/wetflyswing.
Absolutely. So Sisters is just down the road from Bend, right? In Central Oregon, for those that maybe aren't up on their Oregon geography. And you have some wonderful still waters. I've been down there a couple of times, but obviously don't have the experience you have down there. But you've got some pretty special lakes down there too, don't you?
We do. Crane Prairie Reservoir is always one that hits the books and magazines, and lots of people have heard of it. But we've got lots of other lakes that if you're not from the area, you don't know anything about them. Up in the Newberry Crater, a couple of caldera lakes. They're up about 6,400 feet east in Paulina Lake. If I ever write a memoir, I'm gonna name the memoir "My Life in a Volcano," because I spend the majority of my time up at East and Paulina Lakes. Just down the road from Crane Prairie, heading a little bit north from Crane Prairie, there's a mountain lake behind the ski area, which our ski area here is Mount Bachelor. The lake is Hosmer Lake, and it is fly fishing only lake. The entire lake is a shoal. It's connected with a channel, a system of channels. There's a little creek bed that runs through it, but it's fascinating fishing. A lot of sight fishing, a lot of great dry fly fishing, but certainly shallow water indicator stuff, sinking line stuff. It's a fantastic lake, and one that I cherish, not only to fish on my own, but to guide people. They always enjoy it. The views are spectacular. Those are just a few. We've got a lake just outside of town here called Three Creeks Lake. It's up at about 6,500 feet in this bowl of this beautiful mountain, and it's a heck of a good local fishery. I've been fishing there since I was about 11, and it's one of the places I think it's the first place I ever fly fished a lake. Actually, it was Three Creeks Lake with my good neighbor friend and his dad, and their uncle ran the concession up there, had a little store in the boat rentals, and we'd go up a camp, and it was great times. Back then we were, mostly trolling, royal cushion bucktails, and olive Montana nymph with a red thorax was a great fly. Probably ate it as a dragonfly nymph, I'd guess.
Still a popular fly in England. I see them tying Montanas there, and that's sort of a pattern that is sort of considered old school and nobody uses it anymore, but it's still, I think, a popular pattern, or variations of it on English stillwaters. So it's kind of ironic how what we would consider nobody uses that anymore, and now in other places it's the newest, greatest thing.
Yep.
Now, didn't Hosmer have Atlantic salmon in it at one time? Am I correct there? I remember that.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Around 10 years ago now, ODF&W decided to stop stocking Atlantic salmon in Hosmer. And the first year that they dropped the Atlantic salmon program, they put in cutthroat trout. And then a year or two later, they started besides the cutthroat, which they continued to stock, they started adding Crane Prairie stock rainbow, which are just growing to enormous sizes.
Sounds horrible.
No, it's not horrible at all. In fact, I would say that on average, we're seeing bigger rainbows in Hosmer than we do at Crane Prairie. Not that there's anything wrong with the Crane Prairie fish, but catch a lot of 18 to 22 inch fish at Crane, and at Hosmer, it's just ever so slightly bigger than that.
Oh, okay. So if I book my flight for when?
Why don't you come down in June?
Okay. And is it Eastlake as well? It's got a pretty good callibaetis hatch. Am I correct there, or am I grasping at straws?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I would call Eastlake our number one callibaetis fishery in Central Oregon, quite possibly our number one callibaetis fishery in the state. Mm-hmm. Years ago when I first started fishing Crane Prairie in the 80s, Crane Prairie had a pretty tremendous callibaetis hatch. Some different water conditions, water problems, drought, irrigation issues, stickleback population, all kinds of things have contributed to having less callibaetis. Interestingly, 3 years ago or 2 years ago, we had a year in June where there was about a week where it just seemed like it was back, baby. It was back.
Yeah.
And, you'd go back, last year and this year about that same time in mid-June, and just, you saw some trickling around, but it wasn't like the epic callibaetis hatches that, we got that one year and that we would always get back in the late 80s, mid 80s and late 80s. When I first started fishing Crane Prairie, I used to fish Crane Prairie every Thursday morning with my college fishing buddy, Chester Allen. I worked at a fly shop in Bend. And he worked as a maintenance guy in Sun River, a resort just south of Bend. And we would start our day every Thursday morning at Crane Prairie, kicking out in our float tubes from a place called the Osprey Management Point near the resort. And we were joined every morning by a bunch of old farts from the Central Oregon fly fishers.
I've spoken to those guys.
I know. These guys would be out in their prams drinking, screwdrivers, vodka and orange juice, eating donuts and catching fish on callibaetis and damsel. So it was great. And usually Chester and I would get, blown off the lake by about lunchtime, and we would go have a burger at the South Twin Lake Resort and either fish the lower Deschutes or the Crooked River for the rest of the day. So those are fantastic days for sure, back at Crane Prairie and really just in general here in Oregon. Still is great here.
Oh, yeah, it is. It sounds like I've got a good friend that lives in Bend now. He retired and moved up from California, which apparently seems to be a popular thing to move from California to Central Oregon. To me, the common theme I heard throughout, and again, the theme of this podcast, is the dry fly fishing opportunity you have there, and through, your experience with Tom and traveling around to apply those techniques to still waters. And I think we mentioned that most times people are thinking still waters is all a subsurface game, and the best dry fly opportunities are always on moving water. But It's a very popular tactic, not only in Australia, but also in England. As well, and other places. And yet out in Western North America, Western Canada, Western United States, we don't get the opportunity to do it anymore. And I think we should, because first of all, if fish start poking their noses out, you want to catch. It's tough to beat that one-on-one experience of trying to get a fish. You get instant feedback on your fly and your presentation. So I think that's why it's important to have that dry fly fishing in your arsenal, right?
I agree. Yeah. I think one of the things that my client base that I guide enjoys so much about being out with me besides the fact that I'm hilarious and I make them laugh all day long. No,
That's the best part.
I sometimes I'm, it's pretty fun being with these people. A lot of guys I'm guiding, 5, 6, maybe even 8 or 10 times a year, and you really get to know people and understand their sense of humor and can really kind of, turn the screws on them a little bit and give them a hard time, and it's a lot of laughs. So we have a great time. But I think more than that, they wouldn't keep going with me if we weren't catching fish, and if I wasn't providing, really great service with a heck of a nice boat or boats and equipment that I provide in there and stuff. But I think what they really appreciate, so many of them, is the fact that I do focus so much on dry flies. Look, man, I mean, I've got the, Patagonia waterproof bag that is full of every spool and sinking line imaginable. I own every strike indicator that is known to man, and I fish that way too. But I fish so many dry flies throughout the day and season that I think a lot of people are really surprised at how much dry fly fishing, even when, it's not the dry fly time. One of the things that I do is I move around. Yeah. I try to pick my lake based on, elevation, weather conditions, hatches, if not hatches, terrestrial activity, and really try to make sure that we have the best opportunity to do, at least a good portion of the day up on a dry fly. And sometimes it doesn't work out, and that's fine. We'll fish an indicator or a sinking line. That's okay.
That's the same. And it's amazing. You mentioned you can even pull fish up when there's no apparent dry surface activity. And we mentioned earlier on about I go down to Jurassic Lake, and a big chubby Chernobyl, you can pull fish up that they will come up, and to see a fish in that 10 plus pound category put its head out of the water is a bit heart stopping. Trying not to set the hook too early and pull it out, because it almost scares you how big the fish are. So you mentioned you've got callibaetis. What other dry fly other insects? You mentioned terrestrials, so your beetles, your ants, your grasshoppers. Are they all popular there, or are we talking just ants? We talking just hoppers, or all of them?
No, all of the terrestrials for sure. But I'll just run through the list of, some other things that we fish on dries. So some of our lakes have a really good black dancer caddis hatch. Okay. You'll see a ton of them in the morning around the boat ramps and docks, kind of hovering, dancing with a big cloud of them. And a lot of customers look at those with their long antenna and they think, oh, it's callibaetis, Yep. I'm like, nope, look a little closer. Those are actually caddis. And in the evenings, you'll get some pretty tremendous emergences of those caddis. So fishing like a black X caddis in a 16 or 18 works pretty great for that. Well, we do get traveling sedge on some of the lakes. I've seen kind of a resurgence of that. Had several bad years of traveling sedge where they were almost non-existent. But these last 2 years, I've seen a lot more of them, particularly on Hosmer. Of course, damsel adults. Man, I had some just crazy good fishing on damsel adults. I'm going to tell you a quick story. So
sure.
Had my customer Milt and another customer, Kevin, Milt's friend Kevin. I actually like Kevin better, but anyway, we were cruising along the shoreline at Paulina Lake in this little kind of back bay, very shallow water, and we'd been fishing. One had a beetle on, one had a damsel on, and we're fishing, and I'd see this beautiful rise. It had to have been a nice brown, and I use a Minn Kota bound mount trolling motor with a remote control that I hang around my neck on a lanyard, and we'd go really slow along the shorelines when possible. And Kevin was in the bow of the boat, and he throws this damsel just a little short of where I wanted him to throw it. It's probably in about a foot of water, but maybe around 12 feet off of the bank line. And the brown that I saw rise earlier was probably just inches from the bank line, but he saw the damsel and just came straight at it. And when the fish is coming straight at it and they're locked in, but you see that whole body, just, their tail and fins and everything are coming at that fly just straight on. That fish did not care that boat was anywhere near us and came up and just inhaled that damsel. It was one of the coolest damsel takes I've ever seen. And I love damsel take typically because they smash them, but they don't always smash them, sometimes they just kind of roll on them and open their mouth and roll on it and bring it down. But it's a beautiful take, and I love that damsel fishing time when you can catch them on dry flies. And Paulina Lake and Eastlake and Hosmer Lake and Crane Prairie all have great damsel adult times that you can really catch a lot of fish on damsel adults.
Okay, let's. If that doesn't sell it for no other reason, just that explosive takes. Because you mentioned the traveler sedges. We've up in Western Canada where I live. It's with all the drought conditions that we were experiencing as well. I think it dried up a lot of the prime shoal areas where the larvae were, and it's taken a while for them to reestablish themselves in some bodies of water, and unfortunately in others they just haven't come back. And they're such a fun insect because they're big. They're like golden stone size. And the takes are usually pretty explosive. I think the last good hatch I ran into is my wife and I went down and fished Monster Lake near Cody, Wyoming. And we're just going down there for a visit and just going to go fish some lakes, and ran smack dab, surprisingly into a traveling sedge hatch that was on, usually that's more nocturnal in their habits, but they were on, middle of the day and all the way through, and it was unbelievable. And that's where a lock styling approach really helped, because we tried the traditional anchoring, and you'd sort of, tag all those fish within your casting range. And then every other fish after that seemed to be just that little bit further, almost like they knew that little zone of around your boat was not a safe place to be. And I said, to heck with this. We're going to throw the drogue out and just go from one end of the shoal, the lake, because the lake was like, you mentioned about Hosmer, just one giant shoal. Why not cover it all, right? And it was just spectacular. Any fly, as long as it was the right size and you could strip it and make a wake, because those things like to scurry, and they would come up. And you got to know the rise forms of the different fish. A rainbow would typically explode on it. Cutthroat would try, and it's almost like they're uncoordinated. They're trying to play with it like a puppy before they eventually get a hold of it. Browns tend to be a little bit more delicate, it was a pretty cool experience. So
what's your fly? I like a tom thumb, but what do you like?
Tom thumb's good. Another popular fly we like is Mikulak sedge. It was in my first book. It was tied by...
That's the one with the stacked...
the tri-wings of elk hair.
Yeah.
And in recent years, that's a fun pattern to fish, but it's dubbing and stacking, and it's time consuming. And I've got one, I'm going to have it out on my YouTube channel in the near future, called the synthetic sedge. That's all synthetic materials, like Semperfli poly yarn and straggle string for the body and a little rubber legs to kick. And simple to tie, no stacking, no dubbing, and being synthetic, it repels water more so than natural materials. And it easy to tie. So yeah, and sometimes that day on Monster Lake, Chernobyl ant, a chubby Chernobyl, anything that made you could make a wake. That's all that seemed to matter.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, there are those special days. So yeah, tom thumb is great. Not the most durable fly on the planet, and it seems the more rattier it gets, the better they like it.
The better it works. Yeah.
But if you tie it ratty, I found sometimes they want to chew it up, not have you tie a poorly tied fly. They want the honor of destroying it, not you tying it, haphazardly and bits and pieces sticking out everywhere. So yeah. Good fly.
You just gave me an idea. I'm going to try some rubber lake tom thumbs out for next season.
I just like, because you can make them skate, right? You just imitate that kicking of the little legs running along, and anything to, almost like a gurgler approach. Because, even, in our lakes, where I am now in Alberta, we have a lot of bait fish, like fathead minnows and brook stickleback, that the browns and rainbows will get in the shallows and herd up. And that extends right through, the prairie provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. And I was in Manitoba this fall, and we were getting fish, big tiger trout on popper fry in 1 foot to 2 feet of water against the cattails. And that fly's got, you're probably familiar with it, it's basically looks like a little zonker with a foam post at the front. So the fly kind of hangs just in the surface, about on a slight angle, maybe a 30-degree angle, with that little popper sticking up. That's what you get to see, and that makes it skate. And you just, like you discussed with your damsel, this big wall of water, this big bulge in the water comes up behind it and just crushes it. So my definition of dry fly fishing on lakes is pretty broad. If it floats, insect, fish, we get boatmen and backswimmers up here. Do you have that down there in the fall months?
We do. Yeah, we do. We'll get that.
That's pretty exciting. because those
Yeah.
fish just seem to lose their minds when they get on those things. And it was, my wife and I were lock styling earlier this year, and it was a little breezy, and you had to, as soon as your fly hit the water, you had to make almost a 4-foot pull to get tight to those flies, because the way your flies land on the water is just like the naturals, and those fish would just explode on them. And if you weren't tight to your flies, there was slack, and they grabbed it and threw it, and you never had a chance. You were just left shaking. So
Yeah.
So let's talk about, okay, for dry flies, let's run through the gear a little bit. Rods you like to use, weights, lengths, lines, and then we'll get into the black hole of leader setups, because everybody's got different setups. So we'll talk through all that.
Yeah.
So let's just walk through that from sort of rods, lines, right down to leaders and flies.
Yeah. So, I'm fishing mostly Sage lake rods, the new R8, and have some, a couple years ago model Sage X's, mostly 10-footers, 5 and 6 weight here. I do have a 10-foot 4-weight that I employ a lot. And, for dry fly fishing, as opposed to indicator fishing, I prefer totally different floating lines for that situation. And, the dry fly fishing line that I'm going to present, a callibaetis or a damsel or a beetle, is typically going to be a pretty similar line to what I'd use on a spring creek here in Oregon too. So, I don't think it's 100% necessary for it to be a totally stealthy color, but I don't think that it hurts either. Having a olive or tan, a head on the line or gray, can add some benefit to the fish not seeing it in the air and maybe not being as spooky when it's landed on the water. So I definitely fish a, pretty long rod. There are times that I go out and play on the lake with a 7.5 at 5-weight fiberglass too, or, fish my old Winston IM6 8.5 at 6-weight. It's just a cool rod, and it's fun to put a bend in once in a while. But I think for really serious lake fishing, you're looking at 9.5 and 10-foot rods, and I prefer a 10-footer.
Yeah, I'm the same way, or even longer. But you fish the rod you've got, right? So people don't have to go out and necessarily totally retool for still waters. But I think if you do any amount of stillwater fishing, you're going to quickly fall in love with that extra length. That 1 foot can make such a difference.
Yeah, and reels. I think. Look, for my guide rods, for boat rods, I've got everything in doubles, because a lot of times I have 2 people on the boat, and you can't hand somebody one thing and say, well, he's got the only one of these on the boat and that's working, so tough luck, pal.
That's not a good business model for a prolonged guide service.
That's not, no. So, for myself, I've got everything in doubles too, because guess what, when my wife goes fishing with me and I don't have what she needs, I would be in big trouble. So, at home, I'm using mostly Sage and Galvin reels, have a million spools for both, all the different sinking lines, but, just something with a good disc drag that's smooth, that's reliable. You don't often see the backing out on the lake, although I did have a fish at Hosmer take us to the backing here in August. That was spectacular. And for leaders for dry fly fishing, I use a lot of chassis style leaders for all my sinking lines and indicator fishing. But for dry fly fishing, I usually just use a Rio Power Flex. I'm a big fan of Rio Supple Flex for spring creek fishing, but I prefer the thicker butt section and the better turnover, particularly on windy days, and really making sure that, everything straightens and goes towards that target, whether the target be a bank line or a log or the drop-off zone, whatever. It could be a million things, as most of our listeners know. But I like those Rio Power Flex leaders, and I always fish a fluorocarbon tippet when I'm in the lake. I use Fluoroflex Plus, and typically 3X through 6X. I carry 7X, and I certainly carry 0, 1, and 2. Yeah. But most of the fishing that we're doing around here is 4, 5, and 6. Yeah. And just kind of matching that to the fly size more than anything. And I always like to sneak in. We have customers that aren't used to fishing, 6X and some, especially not used to fishing. If they're not used to fishing 6X, I guarantee you they're not used to fishing 7X. Some days you just have to go to that. Now, I almost never tell people, that I'm putting 7X on for them because that's a mental block. That just, oh God, I won't be able to do it. But so, you get them to hook a fish and bring it to the net, and you're like, hey, I just want to let you know you just landed that fish on 7X, and they're like, really? That's so cool. It's like, yeah, you did it and you're going to do it again. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So a couple of questions there. First of all, you mentioned chassis leaders. For our listeners that aren't familiar, what do you mean by a chassis leader?
Yeah. So chassis leader, I actually learned in Tasmania. I guess to an extent, I'd been fishing a chassis leader for chronomid, especially deep water chronomid fishing for a long time. But, on sinking lines, I never fished a chassis leader. And it's simply a butt section, could be anywhere from 3 feet. A lot of times I'll use a 3 or 4 foot butt section, typically 12 or 15 pound Seagar fluorocarbon. And I'll loop that to the fly line. I'll put a tippet ring on the other side. I've been using these oblong shaped Japanese tippet rings. They're like 3 millimeters, I think. And they're really cool, man. They're really cool. They stop if you have a slip strike indicator on, they'll stop the indicator from slipping down all the way. I rarely use those on the shorter leaders because it's not necessary.
Yep.
But yeah, chassis leader is a great way to go because if you've got this, 15 pound butt section that you can move your strike indicator up and down that length, whatever it is, you have, if it's 4 feet long, you can change your depth of your flies if you're fishing underneath an indicator by up to 4 feet without changing your tippet. And if you're fishing a chassis style leader on a sinking line, obviously you can put a fairly long tippet on there and put, the point fly on and then a dropper fly. And if you feel comfortable with it, you could put a bob on as well and have, 2 droppers and a point.
Yeah.
And that can be pretty effective.
So your leader, you've got the butt section, then you've got to that tippet ring, and then it's just straight tippet more or less for the balance of the... Okay. Yeah.
Yep. Straight tippet.
And just adjust that for the situation. Why the oblong versus round?
Well, they're really easy to handle. And so I think more than anything, that was just why I tried them. I found them one day on the internet and I was like, wow, those look really cool. So I ordered some and they're just extremely easy to handle.
Yeah, well, that's a good deal because I've watched people... I always tell them, don't take them off the tippet ring. Don't take them off the snap ring they're dispensed on until you've tied onto them. Because I've watched people pull one off and they're trying to hold this little thing in their thumb and forefinger. And it's great for tippet ring sales because you're just dropping them in the grass and not using them. Okay. So the other question I had that popped into my mind, and maybe for our listeners too, is fluorocarbon versus nylon tippets for dry flies on lakes. So you... mind either way, or do you prefer one over the other, and why?
I'm definitely on Stillwaters fluorocarbon tippet guy. I think it's really important because it's just more invisible in the water due to its light refractive index, right? I mean, nylon is 60-something% visible, and fluorocarbon is got less than 10% visible.
Yeah.
Fluorocarbon sinks into the film a little bit, which probably is a great thing to minimize shadowing and surface disturbance. In some cases, that sink could result in a little bit of micro drag on a windy day, but probably not enough to worry about, missing opportunities for fish in the Stillwaters. So, in rivers, particularly technical rivers like Armetolius River, which is a fly fish only spring creek about 12 miles from the fly shop, I would never fish fluorocarbon as a dry fly tippet. I just feel like it sinks into the film, adds a lot of micro drag, and it's not the right material for that. So I'd use nylon there. But in lakes, I think the invisibility, the light refraction, and the fact that it just, kind of sinks down into the film makes it a better material for that. Plus, it's just tough. You get fish after fish. It's soaking in the lake all day long. It's not absorbing water. Knot strength stays the same. Fish runs you over a log, or here we have, it's volcanic here, so we've got a lot of lava rock, and it's just tougher. It's just tougher than nylon.
Yeah, I like it because sometimes people say, oh, well, on small flies, fluorocarbon will drag it down. But I find when I'm fishing dries on lakes, most times you're not just pitching it out there and then like you're fishing an indicator and then you sort of sit down and wait for a fish to find it. It's pretty dynamic. You're picking up, presenting, letting it sit for a second, picking it up, putting it somewhere else. So that fly really doesn't have a chance for that to happen because it's just not on the water long enough. So,
well, and look, if it is sinking, I carry the little CNF design Ruby cell fly dryer plus an Amadou, plus an Umpqua Feather Merchants, dry fly towel. I can squeeze the water out of any of those with those three tools and then put it in my Loon or Shimazaki dry shake and get that fly floating really, really great again.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried about the fly singing. Look, flies sink. I mean, you fish dry flies, you have to be prepared to maintain that dry fly on a regular and constant basis. And so if you're not maintaining the dry fly with those tools, some kind of a fly dryer and then a powder to, a desiccant powder to get the last bit of moisture out of there, you're not really fishing dry flies as effectively as you could be.
No, and I don't know if you've tried this, but I've also fished dries using lines like a midge tip, either Rio's the original midge tip or the hover tips. And most people look at me and go, "You're fishing dries with it? Okay, explain how that happens." And most of the dries, if you're looking at English style dries, they're not your Parachute Adams, Humpies, your traditional Catskill dries. They're kind of a wet fly with maybe a little bit better hackle, so they sit in the film. So this midge tip you cast out, eventually, yes, that tip is going to overpower those flies and pull them under. And the second they disappear, then you start a hand twist retrieve and track those flies just beneath the surface where those fish are. That's the zone they're feeding in. And you're pulling this gangly, buggy-looking fly through them. They love it. And so you're getting, I find you get this 2-for-1 presentation. You get that whole dry fly thing.
Yeah.
And then when they're gone, then you just, track them back, a little hand twist, get them back and pick them up and cast them again. So it's kind of a different way of doing it. And that was a technique I read about or learned about in England, where they do a lot of the dry fly fishing over there. With teams of dries and things like that. Because I remember, John Horsey as well, right? He's a English competition angler and has quite a fall. You and Stillwater guys like you and I.
I don't know him, but I know who he is. Yeah.
No, I don't know him either, but know of him.
Yeah.
And he was mentioning he likes to use 7 weights for the ability to pick up a lot of line and cover a fish. It's just got more backbone to do it, right? So it's just interesting how different places on the planet, how they adapt their presentation tactics to their local situation and how applicable they are to the rest of the world, right? Thankfully, our fish don't know about boundaries and borders and what they are and aren't supposed to do based on their part of the earth they live in. They're fish, thankfully, and they just do what they do. So that's pretty cool. So do you like to use multiple flies when you're fishing dries?
Personally, I love to use multiple flies when I'm fishing dries. When I'm guiding, I find it can be fairly difficult to get clients to fish multiple flies. I find that the tangle percentage and the time spent, either totally re-adding, a new leader or a long piece of tippet just isn't worth a lot of times the effort that, putting 2 flies out on the water is. But yeah, I mean, I certainly have some customers that have the casting abilities to do that better. I usually fish 2 flies. When we were in Taz, we were fishing 3 and that was very cool. But, typically I prefer around here just to fish 2 flies. And a lot of times that's an emerger and, a dun or, some combination. Maybe it's a beetle and an ant or, something just to show the fish different things.
And when that fish rises, you can drop 2 in the general vicinity. I just find when you put that 3rd on, a lot of times that tangle coefficient seems to go off the dial for some reason.
Yeah.
So are you tying off the bend or are you off dropper tags?
No, dropper tag. I prefer a dropper tag.
Yeah, I'm the same way too.
Yeah, I think off the bend in stillwater fishing is maybe off of a hopper or a chubby or something like that. That's not that bad of an idea, but even that, I would still prefer to fish a bigger fly off of a tag. And then maybe the smaller fly at the end or vice versa. But no, I don't generally fish off the bend in lakes.
Imagine a place where the river meets your doorstep without breaking the bank. Introducing Jackson Hole Fly Company, redefining the online fly shop experience. JH Fly Co. designs and manufactures all of their own products so they can deliver high-quality fly rods, reels, flies, and gear directly to your door at incredible prices. You can visit them right now, jacksonholeflycompany.com.
No, I'm the same way. I find, if we get off topic a bit here, but subsurface, and it comes from the Euro nymphing, right? That you've got, if you're tying eye to the hook, bend off that hook, and then down to the second fly, the point fly. First of all, I worry that you impact the action or the ability of that fly to fish because you basically tied a weight to it. Think of it like a car and a boat trailer, right? All of a sudden that car is not nearly as maneuverable or behaves nearly as well as if you didn't have the boat trailer on the back of it. And if a fish comes in a vertical presentation and kind of opens its mouth to take your fly, its nose, its lower jaw and nose can, touch the leader and push the fly away, or all of a sudden the fish senses something tickles, I guess, and they don't like it and they refuse to fly, right? So I like those. Plus just the simple convenience. If you want to change a fly, you just change the fly, right? Other than consuming the dropper tag, which you can replace. I'm like you. I'm the same way. It's I find a superior way to fish. So when you're fishing personally yourself, do you prefer to fish anchored or lock style? Or you mentioned using your Minn Kota. What are some of your tactics you like to do when you got your rod line and reel ready? You feel you got a good opportunity to get a fish on top. How do you like to approach it? What's your tactics?
Well, I'm a mover, man. I mean, I certainly, can see the benefit of putting two anchors down and staying in one spot at times. But I like to move. I've always liked to move where, when I learned how to fish from my grandpa, he was like, if the fishing's slow, move fast. If the fishing's fast, move slow. Yeah. And it's just always kind of stuck with me on streams and also now in lakes as I've really kind of taken my career into this, stillwater realm. So, I'll use sometimes I use both the drogue and the Minn Kota in combination. Put the drogue off the side of the boat, but, the wind kind of keep pushing the boat into the shoreline. I'll just, use that Minn Kota and spin it around and, every once in a while hit the motor up to 3 or 5 or whatever it takes just to back up just a little bit and yet continue to, be drifting down with the wind. And a lot of times here, in the summertime, we do get calm days, get more windy days than we get calm days, but the drogue is not an option. And so we'll just, kind of use that Minn Kota motor and, just cruise along the shoreline at comfortable casting distance or non-spooking distance for the fish off of the target zone and keep moving. A lot of times on those days, that's going to be terrestrial fishing. That's going to be, finding logs that, are going to have carpenter ants or other ants that they're falling off. It's, near our rocky cliffs or lava rock that harbor a lot of the grasshoppers. And then just anywhere there's a forest nearby, which is most of our lakes, fishing those beetles. Yeah. So a lot of times that fishing, when we're moving like that is done with the terrestrial stuff. And then, a lot of times the callibaetis hatches or the damsel hatches, we'll anchor up or hit anchor mode on the Minn Kota and stick close there for a while and just stay put.
Yeah, those Minn Kota, because in our lakes, I tried a bow mount, but our lakes have pretty informal launches, and trying to recover a boat with the bow mount there was interesting because the bow mount hits the bottom, 10, 12 feet from shore, and I'm in this trying to not embarrass myself to recover my boat, but still use the stern mount. But with your bow mount, you have the ability, right? You can cruise contour lines with those, can't you? And that's such a benefit to be able to do that, to target those areas.
I think that's a really, really important topic of conversation too, is cruising those contour lines. I think one of the things that a lot of people are missing when they're out on the water is the ability to see not only fish, but maybe more so the structure that the fish would be into. Either they're not wearing the right glasses, or they haven't trained their eyes, or they're just not paying attention to see that. It's just such an incredible tool to have as an angler, whether you're guiding yourself or guiding for a living, to be able to work those contour lines and know where you are in the lake and be able to read that structure and be able to see into the water to really understand where the fish are going to be.
Yeah. And I just want to touch on a drogue a little bit. I have covered it in previous episodes. I had Devin Olson, U.S. fly fishing team member, on, and we talked about using competition techniques in sort of recreational still waters, and we talked about a drogue. But if somebody's just listening for the first time to my podcast, Jeff, can you explain what a drogue is and why it's such a neat tool to use on still waters?
Yeah, absolutely. So drogue is essentially an underwater parachute. If you come from other boating, world stuff, sometimes a drogue would be called a sea anchor in a lot of locations. I think in the fly fishing world, particularly the Commonwealth countries, call these same devices a drogue.
Yep.
And here, some people call them drift socks, some people call them a sea anchor. But I think it's cool that the term drogue, which is synonymous for those other things, is really, kind of become more universal. So even here in Oregon, when I'm talking to people about drogues, they're also talking to me about drogues. Yeah, we used our drogue today, and thank God, that term is, for a fly angler, I think that's what people ought to call them. But essentially, you decide which side of the boat you want to fish from, and put the drogue on the other side of the boat. So if you want to fish off the port side of the boat, you'd put the drogue on the starboard side of the boat and turn the craft into the wind and let that wind push the side of the boat, and the drogue is going to inflate and it's going to slow the boat down substantially in the wind.
Yeah, it's amazing how slow it before you deploy, as you're clipping along, and all of a sudden, you just time stands still almost.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I have, I think, 5 or 6 different drogues. I used 2 different boats, and my biggest drogue I actually brought back from Tasmania. It was one that the guys used over there, and I was just so impressed with it. I was like, I gotta have one of those.
Yeah, is that the one I've seen? We talked about Tom Jarman, and if you're not familiar with who he is, just look him up on YouTube. He's got a great channel, explains a lot of the tactics that Jeff and I are talking about. But it looks almost mesh-like and has it looks like the top of it floats. It's different to the ones I use, the grays or the Winchwood style paradrogues. I got mine from the UK. His looks different, and it's interesting you brought that up. What's different about that drogue and why you liked it?
Yeah, so it comes with 2 pockets in kind of the Patagonia duffel bags that are so popular. Those are essentially made out of truck tarp material, right? So when you see a long haul truck going across the plains of Alberta or Montana, the stuff is covered in a really heavy duty tarp material that's very strong nylon. So this drogue that these guys make down in Tasmania is made out of that. On the top and bottom, it has like a pocket, and then in the middle, it's mesh. And on the top end, you would stuff a long foam pool noodle down that pocket and then run a rope through it. And on the bottom end, you would put some steel chain on the bottom part of the pocket to help it sink on the bottom. The top floats, the chain sinks, and then it connects on both sides to a rope that you would then extend some rope to either side of the boat. It's a really ingenious. In fact, I have a winch. Is it Winchwood or Winwood?
Winchwood, I think.
Winchwood. Yeah. I have a Winchwood drogue that I use on my smaller boat, and I am going to have my mother sew some pocketing into the top and the bottom of that and employ the same ideas that the Tasmanian drogue has. You put some foam and some chain in it because it doesn't always want to open up quite right. It twists, and the chain would get it straight down below, and it's perfect.
Yeah, because I had this discussion with Devin. Sorry,
Devin.
Gone blank. Getting old.
What's his
face? Yeah. Sorry, Devin. You're not a what's his face.
Yeah.
But at the same thing, especially on a brisk day, because the surface chop kind of wants to keep the drogue collapsed, and it's hard to get it open and deploy. And I've often thought about maybe not so much in flotation on the surface, but maybe even, the clip-on depth, the weights we use for setting our indicator depth, and just clip those onto the snap links or whatever on the bottom, just to help, pull that lower lip of the drogue down and help it open and deploy. So you've got one of those Tasmanian drogues?
I have 2 of them. Yeah, I have one for my boat, and I have one of my guides, Ton Cummins, is using my second one, and he loves it.
So are they easy to get? Because I know listeners will probably go, okay, I want that, because we're fly fishers, and as soon as we hear something new and neat, we need it. Did you find a place in Tasmania where to get them, or does Tom know, or is that something we can share with listeners, or is that...
No, I have no idea. Unfortunately, I had no idea. I actually had Tom bring them to me when he came in June of 2018. So he brought me two, obviously without, rope, foam, pool noodles, or chain. We got all that stuff at the local hardware store and put them together.
Yeah, you don't want to put that in your luggage. The foam's not so bad, but chain,
Yeah.
It's hard.
So, I don't know. I would imagine that you could probably find them online.
Yeah, just look up Tasmanian drogue or something and see. So
yeah.
But interesting, I did notice that in his videos when he's deploying it. I'm going, okay, that's a different looking drogue. It looks mesh-like in spots that water can flow through it and help regulate the drift. But you could definitely tell that the top lip of it had some sort of flotation in it because it's right up at the surface. So, and that's obviously going to make that pretty good when you're over shallow water. And like you said, you've got, I remember Crane Prairie, there's lots of trees sticking up and rocks and things like that can catch a drogue.
I'll tell you something else that's really cool about it is you can, if your rope isn't too long, particularly your bow rope isn't too long, you can actually just leave it in the water, start your motor, and it just kind of collapses and goes up against the side of the boat while you're moving and doesn't get into the motor. If you had a really long bow rope for some reason, it certainly could get caught underneath the boat and get into the prop, which would be no good.
Yeah, I do that with my Grays one I have, which is like the Winchwood style. It's got long ropes on it, and it will, you can trail, and it trails way behind the boat. You can still maneuver around, just no sharp turns, right? Big, wide, sweeping turns. Because the other style of drogue you can get are the conical ones that, look like a little cone. Those you have to, kind of collapse and bring into the boat because you don't want to be trolling around with those open. That wouldn't be a good thing. They just remain open. So that's cool. So everybody understands what lock style tactics are. The other thing I want to talk to you about with dry fly fishing is people see that surface rise. Do you have it? Because it's not always to the adult stage or whatever. It could be to a merger stage or something like that. Do you have any tricks you use to reading those rise forms? And after you've read it and made the appropriate fly choice, how do you target them? Do you cast in front of it, behind it, or right at it? Any sort of thoughts or guidance on rise forms?
Well, I think in general, if it's not too windy of a day, you can usually see the fish and how their mouth either comes up or sometimes you just see their kind of dorsal come up, and that is a good indication whether they ate the adults or the emerger. For me, it just really depends. There's not a yes answer to this. It's reading the water. Sometimes I would say, generally speaking, I like to throw, if I'm prepared to do it, I like to throw pretty close to the previous ring that just occurred, right? Yeah. So if a fish comes up, I like to put it basically really close to that ring. If I can tell the direction that the fish is going, I'd usually lead that fish by 3 or 4, maybe 4 or 5 feet and try to get that, that next rise form that's going to, occur. I think, we fish dry flies in some pretty clear and very, very shallow water, lots of stuff that might be, 8-10 inches to maybe 3 or 4 feet deep, but extremely clear. So we're seeing a lot of the fish, cruising and it's very visual and it's very exciting. But I would say this, that, if you do put that cast down to a fish that just rose and you didn't get, the fish to come up to the fly, I'm a big fan of waiting and not casting immediately again. Perhaps another fish is going to cruise by in that same line that's the feeding lane, or the fish that rose there is feeding in a circular pattern, which we witness a lot. And by continuously casting into an area, you could spook those fish off where, they're kind of like what you and your wife saw at Monster Lake, where they just become just out of the zone of the casting range. Yeah. And so I like to let the fly sit and disturb the water less, and let the fish find the fly. And that can be painful at times. But if you're letting the fly sit for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, almost every time you're going to get a fish that's going to come up to that fly. And so let's say it is every 5 minutes. That's a lot of fish per hour that you have a chance of putting in the net. And that's pretty good fishing.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's more hunting than just, the traditional blind casting and retrieving that we do when we're fishing subsurface. That's what I like about the dry fly game. It's a lot of 1v1. You see your target, you're trying to read where he's going, and then make your cast where you anticipate that fish to go. Although I find with calm water, when it's flat calm, they can be so random. They can cruise 3 feet and all of a sudden something attacks their interest and they take a 90-degree turn to the left, and just at that moment you're about to deliver and the fish is gone the other way, or worse, turned into your cast, and now you've dropped it right on top of their head, and they scatter pretty quick when the fly line lands on top of them. Does the wind influence if you see a rise, where you're going to put the fly, upwind or downwind? Are you any influence that way? If you see a fish rise and there's a little bit of chop on there, so it's not, you can't really read, the water, the surface chop is masking the fish's presence. If you're going to make a best guess cast, does the wind influence you at all?
Yeah, I mean, usually fish are going to feed into the wind, so I would try to throw that next cast upwind of where the rise was, because typically they're feeding into the wind.
Okay, cool. Fly patterns. I hate to ask this question because
I love to answer it because I love flies.
I know, but it's so, people always like to ask me, if you had one fly to fish? It's like, that's an impossible question, right? Because it's just, but for what are the patterns that are going to predominate your dry fly box?
Let's start with the terrestrials.
Sure.
So, a couple of years ago, I developed a fly. Did I invent the fly? No, I didn't. It's a foam beetle, but it has some Jeff influence to it. So it's tied on a jig hook. I call it a jiggy twist beetle.
Yeah.
And one of the things that bothered me about fishing beetles tied on a traditional dry fly hook was, you put that big foam back on it, and then you tie a foam, red or orange or yellow strike indicator, thorax piece, plus rubber legs. The fly turns over a lot. It's upside down a lot. Yeah. And again, a lot of times customers don't see it. So you're like, the fly's upside down. The fly's upside down, mend it.
Yeah.
And by the time they mend it, the fly's no longer where we wanted it to be. It's not in the target zone anymore. And so I was like, I've seen some dry flies tied on jig hooks. I'm gonna try some beetles tied on jig hooks. And I started tying the same beetle on a jig hook, and then I got the idea of doing this twisted Antron yarn and peacock herl body. So brown Antron, peacock herl, twisted serendipity style, wrapped, put foam over the top, rubber legs on, strike indicator top. And on a jig hook, I would say it lands nearly 100% of the time right side up. You don't have that situation of saying to the customer or yourself, where's my red top? I can't see it. Mend it. It's already there. So it's increased how many fish that we're catching for sure. And I really like Quigley's flag ant. I think it's the very best ant. You can fish, you can fish it in black or whatever color ant, and you can fish it big or small. It shows up in all kinds of water types, and fish just seem to really like it. I love the Rio hoppers, the tan one and the pink one. The last couple of summers, man, I've made a living on that pink hopper. It's pretty silly. And for callibaetis, I'd have to say, Harrop's Captive Dun is one of my very favorite dry flies. It floats really low in the film. I am a gigantic fan and have been since Gary LaFontaine wrote the book, The Dry Fly, which is a masterpiece. And he had a fly in there called the Halo Emerger. And started tying the Halo Emerger several years ago for callibaetis. Originally, I just was using on spring creeks for blueing olives and PMDs, but for callibaetis, I think it's even better. I like comparadums usually for a dry fly, either gray or that nature spirit, callibaetis color dubbing is one of my favorites. A lot of times I'll do poly wings. Mm-hmm. Tell you, our second brood of callibaetis that we get here and that later in the summer are a perfect match for a Tiemco 102Y number 17 hook. And a comparadun with that polywing and that callibaetis colored dubbing on a 17 hook, it's just the sweet spot for our second brood of callibaetis that we have here. So I love that. We already mentioned the tom thumb for the traveling sedge. Damsels, I fished a lot of different damsels, extended, obviously extended body things. Some days the fish really love them, and other days, well, it's like, why don't they love them? Why? Why fish? Why?
Yeah.
And, this year I did some experimenting with a blue chubby, like a size 10 or 12 blue chubby during damsel action, and had some very nice success with a blue chubby.
Okay.
Yeah. And then for the black dancer caddis, I typically like a black X caddis and a 16 or 18. And then I like your floating water boatman an awful lot.
Oh, the water floatman, yeah.
Yeah, that's a heck of a fly, man.
Yeah, you know what? And that came about watching fish crash them right on the surface. And all the boatman patterns we have, when I came up with that fly, it's 20 plus, a long time ago. I don't want to admit how old I am. And most of our patterns were all subsurface. So you just got caught out going, man, if I had something. And they would eat a tom thumb. That was what you went to. But, the tom thumb gets shredded. So you're looking something with a little more durable. It's basically a beetle with some rubber or, silly stretch floss or super floss or one of those Spanflex legs sticking out the side. And I've also got a variation I call the greater water floatman, because I believe in England they call a backswimmer a greater water floatman. And a backswimmer is the larger, more aggressive cousin. And in our local lakes, from about August through until mid-October, even late October, they'll take those on the surface as well. So for me, it's common to have both of those on there, because it seems like for an hour they'll eat the boatman and then they'll flip over to eat backswimmers and they'll flip back to boatman, or they'll take one or the other. So, with that dropper system, you can give them the best of both worlds and let them decide, just please eat one. So yeah. Those are good flies. That's a great list, actually. That's, I think I'm going to be adding, I like that. And I talked to a tire a number of years ago that was using jig hooks for hoppers and larger patterns because of the same issue, because of they're notorious for, even when I use them on moving water, you got to do that mend, because you can see the legs sticking up sideways like masts on a boat, and you got to flip them over. Okay, there it goes. It's settled down. And so that's a great idea, because I guess that tippet probably pulls that fly down so it lands properly on the water, and just that little bit of mass down there. So that's pretty cool. I'll have to get a picture of the recipe for that for you. Maybe we can if you don't mind, I'm going to put those in the show notes. Jeff's favorite dries, and people can, I don't know if you've got a few pictures of them, but I can certainly put links to YouTube and that kind of stuff.
I do. Yeah, I have some pictures of them, and I'll send you some too.
Okay, that'll be perfect.
I'm actually having Dreamcast is producing some of my flies for the last few years, and we just added that one this year. So I'll send you some.
And of course, they're available in your shop, right? For both walk-in and mail orders?
Of course, they are available in the shop. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is there anything we haven't covered in your love for fishing on the surface? If we missed something, we talked rods, lines, reels, leader setup, your flies. We talked about reading rise forms, fishing anchored, lock style, using your Minn Kota motor, which I think is a cool tactic that people don't think about. We talked about applying floatant and keeping the flies dry. Anything else you can think of?
I'll probably think of it in like 3 hours. But,
well, we'll have to have you back then. That'll be good. Part two.
Yeah. No, I can't think of anything else. I think we've covered a lot of ground today. It was fun.
Yeah, it's fun. I love these rambling conversations that take us a while, but we're talking fly fishing, so we can listen forever and talk forever. So how can people learn more about your fly shop? Jeff, yourself, I know you've got a blog, for example. Where can they get that information on both the fly shop and yourself?
Yeah. So, to find me, you can Google the Fly Fisher's Place in Sisters, Oregon, or just go directly to the website, which is www.flyfishersplace.com. We have an Instagram page under the shop's name, the Fly Fisher's Place. I'm just getting ready to launch. It's up, but I haven't put any content on it. Oregon_Stillwater_Jeff site on Instagram that I plan to put some more Stillwater content on that will be kind of separate from the Fly Fisher's Place content. And I'm on Facebook, Jeff Perin. We couldn't afford 2 R's, so I'm just P-R-I-M. Well, I think my family had to sell the other R at some point back in like the 20s or something. So anyway, happy to, to have some follows on Facebook out there too. And then the Fly Fishers Place is obviously on Facebook. So yeah, those are the ways I do. I write kind of a weekly fishing report / blog. Sometimes it is got a little opinion in there. Sometimes it's got some, necessary announcements of, openings and closures of waters or boat ramps or facilities near those places. Sometimes I'll complain about, the Forest Service not having bathrooms open when the boat ramps are open, or, not putting docks in, even though the lake has been ice free for 3 weeks. And I actually kind of gained this amazing, friendships with people. They're like, Jeff Perin's the only guy speaking up for us out there.
That's good, because
he's willing to.
We need
he's
that.
Willing to take on the man, right? Yeah. He's willing to take on the man. And I'm sure I haven't made any friends with the Forest Service, but I've made a lot of friends with the anglers that do really appreciate the fact that docks and bathrooms are in when the lake is open. So stuff like that. It's on my I try to do it every Saturday morning. Sometimes it ends up being Friday night or Sunday morning. But mainly every week I'm doing some kind of extensive fishing report and blog for my area.
That's cool. So, and of course they can, if they're in the area and want to fish with you, they can obviously book a trip, correct? And put some of these tactics and lessons we've talked about today into action and get your tutelage while they're out there 1v1. It's tough to beat that. Yeah,
it might be hard to get a day with me, but not impossible in some cases. But we have about 15 guides that work for me at the Fly Fishers Place, and we can find them a guide that can take them out.
Well, that's cool. That's cool. Well, Jeff, I want to thank you for joining me today. It's great to talk to a fellow Stillwater addict. We can, I think this is part of our therapy. We get to talk back and forth about some of our favorite aspects of Stillwater fly fishing, and particularly what we talked about today, dry fly fishing, because I don't think people perhaps are aware of it, that there's such great dry fly opportunities on lakes as well, and how to best take advantage of them. So I thank you so much for doing that.
Phil, I actually just thought of, remember when you asked me, do you have one other thing you want to?
By all means, let's get it in.
So the other day, you and I were talking about your friend that moved to Central Oregon and fishes Eastlake a lot. And, I think there's a lot of assumptions about, summer months and water temperature and where the fish may or may not be, in relation to dry fly fishing opportunities. We get times in the summer here that, water temperature will pop up into the 70-degree range, and absolutely positively, we're going to not be fishing the shallow zones where that water temperature is going to be hot. But I think that, soon thereafter, we'll start to get cool nights, especially at, 6,000 feet and above.
Yeah.
And we might get a big thunderstorm and bring some cold rain or hail to the lake, and water temperatures are going to drop. One of the things that I think becomes a little bit cliche in the fishing world is that there's no fish on the shallow zone eating dry flies, and I'm just here to tell you that that's not what I'm finding personally. I'm finding that I can work that shallow zone, particularly with a hopper, ant, or beetle, and find fish nearly every time. I'm also watching water temperature and making sure I'm not harming fish. But at Eastlake and at Hosmer and at Paulina, I'm finding fish eating dry flies nearly every day that the season is open, except for the times that I choose not to fish them to keep the fish safe. So certainly there's fish that are going on into that drop-off zone or down into the deep zone and getting above the thermocline, and that's an option. But dry fly fishing is almost always an option too.
Yeah. I think that's really important. And, in lakes like you've got down there, those fish by that time of the season they're conditioned to look up. They've fed enough on the surface to know that it's a great food source, and you can call them up even when you don't necessarily see any insects on the surface. They know lunch is served up there, and they swing by the cafeteria to see what's available to eat. So that's an important thing, because I agree. Sometimes we get pigeonholed or stereotyped into doing certain things because that's what people say to do. And sometimes it's good to break the mold and just go out and fish and do what you've always done.
I think the most important thing that we can do is be observant.
Yes.
And just, go with the flow and be observant and not be like, well, I read this, that in August, I'm only supposed to fish out here in 40 feet of water and suspend my fly at 27 feet because I read that on the internet.
Yeah.
Right. So go check it all out.
If it works, do it. But if it doesn't,
hallelujah,
do something else, right? Just don't continue banging your head against that wall because you're going to get concussed or bloodied or at the very least, you're going to get frustrated. So no, that's actually a great tip to end this on. So again, Jeff, thanks so much. In the show notes, I'll make sure we put all that list of your favorite dries. I think our listeners will like that. They're always looking for new flies to put in their fly box. There's a couple in there that have piqued my interest that I'll put in there as well. And we'll have all the links to the Fly Fisher's Place and your personal stuff. So let me know when that website of yours is up, or the Instagram page, because I'll be one of your first followers. So.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, Jeff, thanks so much. And thanks everyone for listening. Hopefully you found this enjoyable, and we'll see you on the next Littoral Zone podcast. I want to thank Jeff for taking the time to join us today. As you heard, Jeff loves stillwater fly fishing, especially if he can catch trout using dries and emergers. Please make a point of dropping by the Fly Fisher's Place website and be sure to check out Jeff's blog. His site contains a wealth of information, including a section detailing the lakes and rivers in his area. You can also follow Jeff through his social media pages, Instagram and Facebook. I'll be sure to put the links in the show notes section. If you are ever in or are planning to visit the Sisters area, be sure to contact Jeff at his shop for the latest intel on both the rivers and lakes within his region. Or perhaps better yet, book a guided trip to maximize your experience. While you are visiting the show notes section for links to Jeff's website and social channels, be sure to check out the listing of Jeff's favorite surface patterns he listed in the show. Until next time, I hope you can get out on one of your favorite lakes and give dries and emergers a chance, even if it appears nothing is feeding at the surface. You might be pleasantly surprised at what you might be able to attract up to the surface to eat your fly or flies. Thanks for listening.
That was Phil Roy on the Littoral Zone, part of the Wet Fly Swing podcast and Swing Outdoors. Wanted to give Phil a big thank you for another great episode. I hope this special series gives us a chance to let Phil up the level for all of us through this podcast. You can send any feedback you have to me, dave@wetflyswing.com, or check in with Phil anytime. I hope you've been enjoying this podcast series, and I can't wait till we get the next episode of the Littoral Zone out there. One big reminder, we are going to be doing some Stillwater schools around the country. If you're interested anytime, you can check in wetflyswing.com/Stillwater School, and you can find out where we're heading next. All right. Thanks for stopping in today. See you on the next episode of the Littoral Zone.